In the fall of 1995, we traveled halfway around the world to visit China and follow the ancient silk trading route that Marco Polo journeyed along in 1275. Our Canadian Airlines pilot suggests we look out the window as we approach Beijing, for below is the only ancient man-made artifact visible from the moon, the Great Wall of China. Our first stop is Beijing, the capital of China since the early 1400s, although Beijing's history dates back to 1000 BC. We arrive at the Beijing Grace Hotel for our first evening in China. The following morning, we take a short drive across town to visit a cloisonné factory. The cloisonné technique came to China from Persia during the 8th century. Starting with a cast copper base, the workers apply thin copper strips along the intricate pattern on the outside of the vessel. Once all the metal work is done, artists apply colored enamels within the metal artwork. Once the paint is applied, the work is placed in a kiln, followed by machine polishing. The results of the work is displayed in the showroom for purchase by tourists. We next head 70 kilometers northwest of Beijing to the Great Wall at Battalion Pass. Along the way, we observe parts of the wall in various stages of ruin. At Battalion, extensive repairs have restored the wall to its original state. The Great Wall is over 5,000 kilometers in length, and at this location is approximately 5 meters in width. Along the wall are located these defensive towers, placed such that an archer had full coverage of the ground below. These buildings also served as the barracks for the soldiers stationed here. In these small buildings, observers were placed. Their duty was to light a signal fire if they observed enemy forces approaching. In the afternoon, we went to the Ming Tombs and the 10-kilometer-long Spirit Way. Along the Spirit Way, we passed the stone animals. There were 12 sets of animals, with each set having 2 animals sitting and 2 standing. After the animals, there are 12 sets of generals and other officials. Finally, we reached the Lingqing Gate and the yellow-roofed tombs, the contents of which I was not permitted to photograph. The following morning, we take a short walk around town. A short car trip gets us to Tiananmen Square. This 50-hectare open space can hold a gathering of 2 million. This is the Great Hall of the People. The monument to the people's heroes is located in front of Mao's mausoleum. Tiananmen, the gate of heavenly peace, and the entrance to the Forbidden City. Entering through Tiananmen, we see the Hall of Supreme Harmony, followed by the Hall of Preserving Harmony. Then we reach the Gate of Heavenly Purity. The dragon on the carved stone is the symbol of the emperor. At the top, we reach the Palace of Heavenly Purity. Beyond this palace, we see the Hall of Union, and behind that, the Palace of Earthly Tranquility and its view within. Beyond the palaces is the Imperial Garden. A few kilometers south of the Forbidden City is Tiantan Park, also known as the Temple of Heaven Park, which was built in 1530. We begin down the walkway known as the Bridge of Vermilion Stairway. At the end, we reach the Hall of Prayer for Good Harvest. The temple has 9 doors and 9 staircases, each with 3 levels, and each level has 9 steps between. As we leave the temple along a walkway, we reach the 7-star rocks. Back in Beijing, we take a brief tour of the antique dealers area. By car, we reach Bahai Park, the once playground of the emperors. One half of the park's 68 hectares is occupied by a man-made lake. It's famous for its gardens within gardens, some of which date back 200 years. In the middle of the lake is this 36-meter-high structure known as the White Dagoba. It and the lake were constructed by Kublai Khan in 1651 for a visit by the Dalai Lama. A short distance away is the Lama Temple, or Yunhe Gong. Once a prince's residence, it was turned into a monastery when the prince became the emperor in 1723. Unfortunately, photography was not permitted within the temple, so one had to purchase the following slides. This Buddha began as a 25-meter long by 8-meter diameter sandalwood log from Tibet. It was carved in place and the temple built around it. Leaving the temple, we walk towards the underground city. The underground city turned out to be old bomb shelters. We next visit the Summer Palace at Kunming Lake. Atop a man-made hill is the Temple of the Sea of Wisdom. The material for the hill came from enlarging the lake. This is the famous marble boat constructed in 1888 by Emperor Cixi. This private tea room cost as much as a fleet of ships to build. Our next stop was the Beijing Zoo to see their collection of pandas. Our evening was spent at the Beijing Opera. The story was told by using dance and acrobatics. We head for the western limits of China and the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region. Urumqi is the capital of the region with a population of 1 million, of which 80% are Han Chinese, the balance are Uyghurs, a people of Middle Eastern descent. We board an early morning flight on a Xinjiang Airways plane to Urumqi. We arrive in the early evening and watch the sun set. Morning arrives on our first day in western China. We are taken by car to Red Hill. This is one of the two Hongshan pagodas, one on each side of the river valley, having been erected to ward off flooding. They appear to have worked, as the area now only receives a centimeter of rain per year. This is Renmin Park, adjacent to the Red Hill area. In the afternoon, we visit a silk carpet weaving factory to purchase a carpet for home. We leave the carpet place and work our way towards the town market.
美丽的姑娘，你总要别走，你不必装着。
During the late afternoon, we are back on a plane again, heading towards Kashgar. This small town is located on the edge of the Taklamakan Desert, with a history dating back to 200 BC. It was the primary waypoint for caravans at the desert's edge.
短短的人生，你能有多久？跟我一起唱起歌谣。
We, like many thousands of others, head to the famous Kashgar Sunday morning market. Kashgar is an oasis on the banks of the Tumen River with a population of 1/4 million. The red eggs are cooked, the white ones are raw. We leave the market and wander the streets.
踏遍烈日下的荒场，是哪里掩盖着它？为你种上花，你能否看到它？我们在寻找着你，呼唤着诺托拉。 每个人身体中流着你的血，因此这块土地就是你的家。每个人身体中流着你的血，因此这块土地。
An unexpected sight in town was this tranquil lake. This colorful tomb houses the remains of a locally born concubine of the emperor.
眼中没有泪水，我不再惧畏。
Our guide next takes us to the Kokuping Mosque and Cemetery, as well as the adjacent Alpak Hoja Mausoleum.
你的灵魂何时去？
Later in the day, we attend a nursery school where the children put on a demonstration of local folk dancing. This is the Eidka Mosque, the largest in China and the center of the town. Our final point of interest in Kashgar was the mausoleum housing the remains of Yasup Kash Hashjib, a 11th century leader and scholar. The next morning we returned by air to Urumqi to spend a night in the 5-star Holiday Inn. Shortly after landing, we set out on a 115-kilometer car trip up into the vegetation-rich mountains east of the city. Along the way, we see the well-insulated yurts of the nomadic Kazakh herdsmen. Perhaps the jewel of the trip was the Lake of Heaven, also known as Jade Lake, which is located at 1,900 meters above sea level. Looking at the lake, one might think we were in the Canadian Rockies. We bid farewell to the lake and start our return trip to town. The next morning, we set off on a long car trip to Turpan. Along the way, we encounter the ancient city of Gaochang. This settlement was begun in the 1st century BC and destroyed in 1273. This restored adobe brick lecture hall was built in 518. It, like the monks' study and prayer areas, were left intact by the invading armies, leaving them in much better shape than the rest of the city. After a few more hours of driving, we reached the Basilic 1000 Buddha caves. Some of these 70 caves date back to 430 AD and were actively used until the monastery was abandoned in the 13th century and the caves later destroyed by Muslims and other looters. Like other sites, photos of the interior were not permitted. We finally reached Turpan. This 170,000 person town is located on the edge of the Turpan Basin. Parts of this basin are more than 150 meters below sea level and has the second highest recorded temperature anywhere in the world. Grapevines are grown along the streets to provide shade and humidity, a welcome relief from the dry, hot desert. Not far from Turpan is the ancient city of Jiohi, which dates back to 1000 BC. The city was located on an elevated plateau, some 30 meters above the rivers on both sides, and had a population of 6,000. The city's natural defense structure permitted it to survive years of attack. However, it was finally destroyed in the 13th century by Mongolians. Before leaving the Turpan area, we were shown a Keraz. These man-made tunnels supply water to Turpan from the Bodashen Mountains to the north. They date back some 2,000 years and are composed of some 3,000 kilometers of tunnels and 1,000 access wells. About 3 kilometers east of Turpan is the Amin Minaret. Built in 1770 by a local ruler, the minaret stands 44 meters in height. The minaret is surrounded by grape vineyards, and in the distance one can see the drying buildings used to make raisins. By train, we leave the Turpan area and travel through the desert towards Danhuang, where we will stay for a few days. From our train window, we see flames of oil refineries, as well as long-forgotten remnants of the Great Wall. The first site to visit here is the Magao Caves, which represent the best preserved Buddhist cave artwork in China. The caves were started in 366 AD when a monk had a vision to cut a cave into these sandstone cliffs. The monastery prospered for 1,000 years, then it was abandoned and forgotten. At the turn of the 20th century, a wandering monk stumbled across the cave and discovered there was 492 intact caves, within which were over 2,000 statues and over 45,000 individual murals. About 4 kilometers south of Danhuang are the Misashan, or Singing Sand Dunes, and the Crescent Moon Lake. For fun, we take a dromedary ride to the top of a nearby dune. Danhuang and proceed further east to Jiayuan, now an industrial city, but once the primary west end of the Great Wall. 5 kilometers to the west of Jiayuan is the Ming Fortress. Its 10-meter high walls form the west termination of the Great Wall and an entry point to the main part of ancient China for the trading caravans. This section of the wall, running west from the fortress, is typical of most of the Great Wall in the largely unpatrolled desert area. A few kilometers further northwest of the fortress is the termination of the Great Wall. This section, known as the Overhanging Great Wall, was built in 1540 and fully restored in 1987. The wall itself terminates in the Black Mountains. In the afternoon, we travel to Jiayuquan City, a small town that has existed for over 2,100 years and is famous for its park and water wells. We continue by car to the town of Lanzhou and then by train through Inner Mongolia on our way to Xi'an. The trip takes us up into the mountains at altitudes over 3,000 meters. The next day, we arrive in Xi'an. This 2,000-year-old city was once the capital of China. This is the drum tower at the main entrance. The Big Goose Pagoda is 64 meters in height and dates back to 652 AD. Xi'an was a fortified city with a 14-kilometer-long wall that is 12 meters in height, providing protection against invaders. A view looking down towards the center of the ancient city with its bell tower. Not far from Xi'an is this large burial mound, which is nearly 150 meters in height. The tomb contains the remains of the first emperor, Kuai Shi Hyangdi. Very close to the tomb, in 1974, while digging a well, a Terra Cotta statue was found. Excavation found over 6,000 life-size soldier statues, each with unique faces. The statues were under a earth roof supported by logs. Over the centuries, the logs and the wood parts of the weapons decayed away. In 1976, 2 more burial sites were found. However, they were less intact. These are some of the 10,000 weapons and other artifacts that were found. In 1980, just 20 meters from the entrance to the tomb, 2 half-scale bronze replicas of imperial chariots were found. Next, we traveled to the bathhouses and hot springs at Hao Quin. Some of the houses are over 3,000 years old, and there are 60 pools fed by natural hot spring water. They date back to the Tang Dynasty as the emperor's private retreat. In 1953, approximately 10 kilometers east of Xi'an, at the village of Bampol, during the construction of a factory, ancient artifacts were discovered. They dated from between 3700 and 4500 BC. At the site were found 45 houses, 200 storage pits, 6 pottery kilns, and 250 graves. The village was surrounded by a 2-meter deep moat with some 300 meters in length and 2 meters in width. From Bampol, we traveled to the forest of the Stele, started in 1087. The library contains over 1,000 stele, or stone tablets. The stele contain information about taxes and other government regulations and maps. Rubbings are taken from the steles and sold as souvenirs. Leaving the library, we tour the streets of Xi'an. Near the airport is this monument to the Terra Cotta Soldiers. Our final destination for the trip is Shanghai, one of the most cosmopolitan cities in China. Morning brings a typical Shanghai day. Our first place to visit is the Jade Buddha Temple. This active temple was built between 1911 and 1918 and has over 70 monks. It is famous for a 2-meter high, 1,000 kilogram solid jade Buddha, which was brought from Burma in 1882. Exiting the temple, we drive towards the harbor. This is the famous Bund, which is the center of commerce. The name Bund is Sanskrit for river dam. The Oriental Pearl Tower dominates the harbor. Leaving the Bund, we walk along Ninjanlu, the main shopping area. Our final treat is Yew Gardens. Once a merchant's home, later a British gentleman's club, it is now a public park. Our tour is over. We go by air to Beijing and catch our Canadian Airlines flight home to Canada.